Story 1. I used to live in an old farmhouse with my roommate, Jake. It was over 100 years old, one of those creaky, drafty places with a history no one talked about. It was the kind of place that looked fine in the daylight, but always felt just a little too quiet at night. I don't believe in ghosts, never did. But that house, it made me question things. The night it happened, Jake and I were in the living room. He was sprawled out on the couch, half watching some reality show, while I sat in the recliner scrolling through my phone. It was one of those evenings where nothing really happens. Just background noise, dim lighting, and the hum of the old radiator. Then, out of nowhere, bang! The whole house shook. A deep, violent crash came from directly above us, like something massive had slammed into the second-floor bedroom. The ceiling above our heads rattled. The walls trembled, and there was the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. Jake and I froze. "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He was already sitting up, eyes wide. "Dude, that was upstairs?" Neither of us moved at first. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That crash hadn't just been loud, it had been forceful. It felt like something had exploded in the room right above us. Then, without thinking, we both bolted for the stairs. I took them two at a time, my mind racing. The layout of the house was simple. At the top of the stairs, there was a hallway with two bedrooms. Mine on the left, Jake's on the right. The noise had come from my room. I was sure of it. Jake was right behind me as I reached my bedroom door. It was closed just as I'd left it. I hesitated. My hand hovered over the doorknob. Jake exhaled sharply. "Just open it, man." I did. The room was fine. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was broken. No shattered glass, no fallen furniture. The window was closed. The bed, the desk, the bookshelf, everything exactly as it had been when I left it. But the room felt wrong. The air was heavy, charged with something I couldn't explain. It was colder too, like a sudden chill had settled in. I stepped inside cautiously, scanning the floor. I expected to see a broken mirror, a fallen picture frame, something, anything, that could explain that sound. There was nothing. Jake edged in behind me, rubbing his arms. "Dude, it's freezing in here." I nodded slowly. "You heard it, right? Felt it?" "Of course I did," he said. "That wasn't just, like, the house settling." Number it wasn't. There was no way a house settling could shake the floor beneath our feet like that. No way a creaky old farmhouse could make a noise so violent, so real. I checked the closet. Empty. Looked under the bed. Nothing. Even the light fixture on the ceiling was intact, swinging slightly but not broken. There was no explanation. Jake let out a nervous chuckle. "Maybe it was outside." I moved to the window and peered out. Darkness stretched across the fields, the barn standing silent in the moonlight. Nothing was out of place. "Nothing," I muttered. Jake ran a hand through his hair, clearly unsettled. "Maybe something hit the roof." We checked. Nothing. We checked the attic too. Nothing. It made no sense. The sound had been so real. The impact had been so violent that we had felt it through the floor. And yet, there was no proof it had happened at all. Jake looked at me. We both heard it. We both felt it. So what the hell was it? I didn't have an answer, and that was the worst part. We went back downstairs, silent, uneasy. Neither of us turned the TV back on. We just sat there in the quiet, trying to convince ourselves that maybe somehow we had imagined it. But we hadn't. Story 2. I grew up in a small one-story house with my mom and younger sister. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old place that had been in our family for years. The layout was pretty simple. 3 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and a long hallway that led to the bathroom and what we called the computer room. The computer room was just a tiny, windowless space at the very end of the hall. We didn't have a proper office, so that's where my mom had set up the family desktop. This was back in the early 2000s, when computers were big, bulky things with boxy monitors and a constant low hum that filled the quiet. I never liked that room. Something about it always felt off. Maybe it was just because it was so closed off from everything else in the house, but it always seemed darker than it should be. Even with the computer on, The glow from the screen barely reached the walls. It was like the light didn't want to spread. One night I was home alone. Mom had taken my sister to a school event, and I had the place to myself. I was in the living room watching TV when I realized I had to use the bathroom. It was down the hallway, past the computer room. As I got up, I noticed the faint blue glow spilling from the doorway, the computer screen dimly lighting up the room like usual. I walked down the hall, not really paying attention to anything, just focused on getting to the bathroom. But as I passed the computer room, I saw something that made me stop mid-step. A shadow moved across the wall. It wasn't fast, like a trick of the eyes. It was slow, deliberate, like someone had stepped in front of the computer screen, blocking the light. My brain froze for a second, but then I laughed at myself. "Geez, you scared me," I said, assuming my sister had somehow snuck back home without me noticing. But no one answered. That's when I felt it. A deep, gnawing wrongness in my stomach. The kind of feeling that tells you something isn't right before your brain even catches up. I turned my head, expecting to see my sister or my mom standing there. But the room was empty, completely empty. The chair was pushed under the desk. The only movement was the faint flickering of the screen. There was no place for anyone to hide. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. My hands went cold. I wanted to move, to step away, to do anything. But I was frozen, just standing there staring into that empty room. Then right as I was about to back away, the computer screen dimmed, like something passed in front of it again. But there was no one there. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't check. I didn't breathe. I just bolted straight for the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock, but I yanked it open and ran outside onto the porch, gasping like I'd been underwater. I stood there for what felt like forever, my legs shaking, listening to the silence of the house behind me. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. But I knew that something had been in there. After what must have been 20 minutes, I forced myself to go back inside. Not because I wanted to, but because standing on the porch all night wasn't an option. I crept through the house, turning on every single light as I went. When I finally reached the hallway, I stood there staring at the doorway to the computer room, dreading what I might see. The screen was still on. The glow was steady. Nothing moved. But I couldn't go back down that hallway. I couldn't even look at that room without feeling like something was looking back. For weeks after that, I refused to use the bathroom at night. I'd hold it until morning if I had to. If I absolutely couldn't wait, I'd leave the door open so I could run if I had to. Eventually, I told my mom about it. I expected her to laugh it off, tell me it was just my imagination. But instead, she got quiet. "You know," she said after a long pause, "your uncle used to say the same thing when he lived here." I just stared at her. "What?" She shrugged, acting like it wasn't a big deal, but I could see the way her hands fidgeted. "When he was younger, before he moved out, he always said he saw something in that room." I felt sick. "What did he see?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "He never wanted to talk about it." I never set foot in that room again. Not at night, not alone. Some things are better left alone. Story 3. I grew up in one of those nice, quiet suburban neighborhoods where every house looked the same. My family had spent years living in rougher conditions, saving up to finally buy something decent. When we moved into our new house, it felt like a step up. A model home that the builders had used to show off the neighborhood, which meant we got a decent deal on it. It was spacious, bright, and open, with this big loft area that overlooked the living room. 2 stairwells led up to it, one in the front and one in the back. The way it was designed, sound carried. You could be up in the loft and hear anything going on downstairs, and vice versa. It was the perfect hangout spot. I spent a lot of time up there with my 2 best friends, Jason and Sarah. We were in high school and they had this whole will they won't they thing going on, except it was less romantic and more just them constantly being all over each other. I was used to it. It got annoying sometimes, but whatever. One afternoon, the 3 of us were lounging in the loft watching TV. Jason had his arm around Sarah, and she was practically curled into his lap. I got up to take a piss, leaving them doing their usual thing. When I came back, something was off. They were on opposite sides of the couch. Sarah looked tense, her arms crossed, and Jason was sitting stiffly, staring at the TV but not really watching it. The mood had shifted, and I could tell right away. "What happened?" I asked. Jason turned to me looking confused. "Your little sister's home." I stopped mid-step. My stomach dropped. "What?" "We heard her," Sarah said. "Just now." I stared at them, not moving. "No one's here." Jason frowned. "Dude, we heard her clear as day. She was giggling, like right behind the couch." Sarah nodded. "It was quick, but we both heard it, like a little laugh and footsteps. We thought she had snuck up here." My mouth was dry. "My sister's not home." They looked at each other, then back at me. Jason let out a nervous chuckle. "Okay, well, I don't know what to tell you, man. We heard something." I felt sick. My little sister Emma was 8 years old. She was at a friend's house. I knew that for a fact because my mom had just texted me an hour ago, saying she'd be there until dinner. I forced a laugh, trying to shake the feeling crawling up my spine. "You probably heard something from outside. Sound carries weird in here." Sarah shook her head. It was right behind us." I turned and looked at the space behind the couch. Just an open area leading to the stairs. No place to hide. Jason stood up. "Let's check the house." I didn't want to. Every part of me was screaming not to, but I couldn't back out now. So we went downstairs, checked the kitchen, the living room, even the front door. Dead bolted. We walked through the hall, past the laundry room, the empty bedrooms. Nothing. No one. We checked every closet, every room. I even opened the pantry and looked behind the coats in the hall closet, just to be sure. Jason scratched the back of his head. "That's really weird." Sarah's face was pale. "It was a little girl. I know what I heard." I didn't say anything. We went back upstairs to the loft, trying to brush it off, but the atmosphere had changed. The air felt heavier, like the room was pressing in. None of us sat back down. Jason finally exhaled and gave a short laugh, shaking his head. "All right, that was creepy, but let's just..." We heard it, all three of us, a giggle, right behind us. It was unmistakable, software playful, like a child amused by some private joke. Jason spun around so fast he nearly tripped over himself. Sarah clapped her hand over her mouth. I couldn't move. My legs locked in place. There was nothing there, just empty space. Then, footsteps, running down the back stairwell. Light, quick, like a child darting away. I don't remember moving, but suddenly I was at the railing, looking down the stairs. Nothing. No one. But I could still hear it. Faint. The sound of small feet hitting the floor. Then silence. Sarah bolted. She didn't say a word, just grabbed her things and ran down the front stairs. Jason was right behind her. I didn't stop them. I wanted to leave too, but it was my house. My empty house. I stood there for what felt like forever, listening, my pulse hammering in my ears, waiting. Finally, I forced myself to go downstairs, checking everything again. But I knew I wouldn't find anything. I sat on the couch and waited for my mom to get home. When she did, I casually asked when she was picking up Emma. She gave me a weird look and said, "Not for another couple hours." I never told her what happened. Story 4. I grew up in a rural town, the kind of place where streetlights didn't exist and houses were scattered far apart. My family's house sat at the end of a long, winding back road that was flanked on both sides by thick woods. Every morning I had to walk about half a mile down that road to catch the school bus. It was a routine I was used to, even in the dark, even in the cold. This particular morning was no different at first. It was early, just before dawn, the sky a dull gray as the night bled into morning. The air was damp, and the world felt quiet, that strange, eerie kind of quiet that happens right before the sun comes up. The only sound was my footsteps crunching on the gravel. Then about halfway down the road, I stopped. Something felt off. It wasn't a sound or a movement, just a feeling. The kind that raises the hairs on your arms before your brain even has time to process what's wrong. I turned my head slowly to my left, towards the woods. That's when I saw them. A group of dogs stood just beyond the tree line, their bodies barely visible in the dim light. They weren't wolves. They weren't coyotes. They were dogs, actual dogs of all different breeds. A German Shepherd, a Labrador, a Dalmatian, a shaggy mutt, and others I couldn't identify. 8 or 9 of them standing side by side, perfectly still, watching me. My heart thumped hard against my ribs. I took a hesitant step forward, hoping they'd move, that they'd scatter like normal dogs would. They didn't. Instead, they stepped onto the road. Not aggressively, not running or barking, just stepping forward in eerie unison, forming a half circle in front of me, blocking my path. I froze. My breath hitched. My brain scrambled to make sense of it. These were just dogs, right? Strays? Maybe they belonged to someone. Maybe they had just gathered here for some reason. But why weren't they making a sound? No growling, no panting, no sniffing, no barking, nothing. They just stood there staring at me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My instinct screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I didn't dare break eye contact. I was afraid that if I did, they would lunge. My breathing came faster, my hands shaking at my sides. The road was empty. There were no cars, no people, no houses close enough for anyone to hear me if I screamed. The bus stop was too far ahead. My house was too far behind. I was trapped. Then, as if something unseen had given them a silent command, the dogs took another step forward. I took a step back. They stepped forward again. A creeping horror spread through me. They weren't just wandering strays. This was deliberate, coordinated. Something was wrong. I couldn't do this. I couldn't stand there and wait for whatever was going to happen next. I turned and bolted back toward my house. I didn't dare look back. I didn't want to see them chasing me, didn't want to see how fast they were moving. All I knew was that my feet had never hit the ground so hard. My lungs had never burned so much. I ran, my backpack bouncing against me, the cold air slicing my throat. The trees blurred past in my peripheral vision, and my ears strained for the sound of paws pounding on the gravel behind me. But there was nothing, just silence, and that was somehow worse. I burst through my front door, gasping, slamming it shut behind me. My mother looked up from the kitchen, startled. "What's wrong?" she asked. I couldn't answer right away. I was too busy gulping down air, my whole body shaking. "Dogs," I finally managed. "There were dogs, on the road. They wouldn't move." She frowned. "Strays?" I nodded frantically, unable to explain why this felt like so much more than that. She went to the window, peering out toward the road. The sky had brightened a little now, the early morning gloom fading away. "There's nothing out there," she said. I hesitated. Then, despite every instinct telling me not to, I stepped forward and pulled the curtain aside. She was right. The road was empty. No dogs, no movement. No sign that anything had ever been there at all. Just silence. Story 5. I don't believe in ghosts, or at least I didn't before this happened. Last year, my mom and I stayed in a hotel while she was attending a work conference. It was a decent place, nothing fancy, but not run down either. Just a normal chain hotel with a lobby that smelled like citrus cleaner and carpets that had seen better days. We had a standard room with 2 beds, a desk, a TV, and a bathroom. Nothing about it stood out. The first few nights were completely normal. My mom would come back from her conference sessions, we'd watch TV for a bit, and then we'd go to sleep. I'd scroll on my phone until I got tired, then eventually pass out. Nothing weird, nothing creepy. But on our last night there, something changed. I don't know what woke me up. I wasn't having a nightmare, and I don't remember hearing any sounds. But for some reason, I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, trying to figure out why I was awake. That's when I saw it. Across the room near the window was a shadow, a human-shaped shadow. I froze. My brain immediately tried to make sense of it. It had to be some kind of illusion. Maybe a coat hanging weirdly. Maybe the way the light from the parking lot outside filtered through the curtains. But as I lay there, barely breathing, I realized something that made my stomach twist. The shadow wasn't cast on the wall. It was standing in the room. I turned my head slightly, trying to convince myself I was just seeing things. But the shape didn't change. It was definitely the outline of a person. Tall, unmoving, no features, no details. just a solid, human-shaped darkness standing less than 2 meters from my bed. I swallowed hard. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would wake my mom, but she was still asleep in the other bed, breathing evenly. I considered calling out to her, but something about the silence in the room made me afraid to speak. It felt like if I acknowledged it, something worse would happen. Instead, I reached over and turned on the lamp beside my bed. Instantly, the room was bathed in warm yellow light. The shadow was gone. I exhaled shakily, feeling stupid for getting so worked up. Of course, it was nothing. I was just half asleep, seeing things. Probably some weird trick of my tired brain, but just to be sure, I scanned the room. The window, the curtains, the desk. Nothing was out of place. There was nothing in the room that could have made a shadow like that. I told myself I was being paranoid and turned the light off. The shadow was back. My whole body went cold. It was standing in the exact same spot, the same shape, the same posture. It hadn't moved at all, but it also hadn't been there when the light was on. It was like it only existed in the dark. I turned the light back on. Gone. Office back again. I did this 3 more times, my breathing growing more panicked each time. Every single time the room went dark, the shadow returned. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't an illusion. It was real, and it was standing right there. I wanted to wake my mom, but something about the way the air felt, thick, heavy, wrong, made me too afraid to move. It wasn't just fear. It was an instinctual kind of terror, like my body knew something my mind didn't. Like if I acknowledged it too much, something would happen. So I did the only thing I could think of. I turned away. I rolled over so my back was to it, curled up under the blanket like a child, and squeezed my eyes shut. I told myself that if I ignored it, if I refused to acknowledge it, it would go away. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. I lay there for what felt like hours, every muscle in my body tense. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I remember was waking up to sunlight streaming through the window. The shadow was gone. Everything looked normal. My mom was already up, getting ready for the last day of her conference. I wanted to tell her what happened, but the words felt ridiculous in my mouth. What was I supposed to say? That a shadow stood in our room all night? That I was afraid to look at it? That I thought something terrible would happen if I moved? Instead, I asked her if she slept well. Yeah, she said, stuffing some papers into her bag. Why? No reason. I looked back at the spot by the window. Empty. I can't explain what I saw. I know it wasn't just my imagination. I know it wasn't a dream. That shadow was there. It was real. And it was watching me. I don't know what would have happened if I had turned around again. And I don't ever want to find out. Story 6, I never really believed in ghosts. Not in the way most people talk about them, at least. I always figured when people said they saw something, it was just tricks of the light, their brain playing games with them, or some weird half-dream state. But then I spent the night in my aunt's old house, and now I don't know what to think anymore. She grew up there, my aunt. It's an old house, the kind that settles into itself at night, making noises that could be anything if you let your mind wander too much. She used to tell me stories about strange things happening when she was a kid. Things moving, doors closing on their own. She never sounded scared when she talked about it. More like it was just a fact of life in that house. I thought she was messing with me. Then she told me about the night she woke up and saw the boy. I didn't believe her at first. It sounded too much like sleep paralysis, the way she described it. Waking up in the dark, not being able to move, a shadow standing over her. But the way she said it, the way her voice went quiet, made me uneasy. The thing is, she told me, when I finally moved, my bed wasn't in the same place anymore. I laughed it off, even though something about it made my stomach tighten. I told her it was probably just a dream. She didn't argue, but she didn't laugh either. She just looked at me and said, "You'll see." I was staying the night because I was passing through town, and she offered me a place to crash. The room I stayed in used to be hers, the same room where she saw the boy. She didn't mention that part until I was already settling in for the night. "You can take the guest room," she said. Then she hesitated. "Actually, never mind. You can sleep in my old room." I must have made a face because she grinned at me. "What, you scared?" I wasn't. At least that's what I told myself. It was just a room. 4 walls, a bed, a dresser, and a closet. Nothing weird about it. But when I lay down, the room felt off, like it wasn't quite empty, like someone had just been there a second before I walked in. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. That's what the dark does. It makes everything feel bigger and stranger than it really is. So I closed my eyes and forced myself to sleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. The kind of dark that makes you question if morning will ever come. At first, I didn't know why I was awake. The house was silent, no creaks or groans from the old wood. Then I realized I couldn't move. It was like something heavy was pressing down on me, pinning me to the mattress. I tried to lift my arms, my legs, even just a finger, but nothing happened. My breath came fast and shallow. I told myself it was sleep paralysis. That's all it was, just my brain waking up before my body. I'd read about it before. It was normal. Then I felt it, a presence, standing next to the bed. I couldn't see anything at first. My eyes were adjusting to the dark, and my heart was hammering so loud I thought it might shake the bed. But I knew something was there. I could feel it, the way you can feel when someone is too close to you, even if you can't see them. Then I saw him, a boy, standing over me. He wasn't moving, just staring down at me, his face barely visible in the dim light. I wanted to scream, to thrash, to do anything, but I couldn't. My body was still frozen. My mind was screaming at me to wake up, to move, to do something. But all I could do was stare back at him. Then he leaned in. His face got closer, just inches from mine. I could see his eyes now, wide and dark, like he was studying me. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Then he reached for me. The second his hand touched my shoulder, I snapped awake. I bolted upright, gasping, my heart slamming against my ribs. The room was empty. No boy, no shadow. Just me, alone in the dark. For a moment, I almost convinced myself it was just a nightmare, a bad dream fueled by my aunt's story. I even laughed a little, shaky and breathless. Then I noticed the bed. It wasn't in the same place. It had moved. Not by much, but enough. Enough that I knew I hadn't imagined it. The heavy wooden frame, the kind that would take 2 people to lift, had shifted at least a foot away from the wall. I sat there staring at it, my skin crawling. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone to check the time. 3:12 a.m. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. I just sat there, watching the room until the sun finally came up. When my aunt found me in the morning, sitting on the edge of the bed, pale and exhausted, she didn't say anything. Just gave me a knowing look. I didn't tell her what happened. I didn't need to. She already knew. But I'll never forget the weight of that hand on my shoulder, or the way the bed wasn't where I left it. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I believe in that boy. Story 7. I live in a quiet suburb, nothing fancy, just rows of houses that all look the same. The kind of place where nothing ever really happens. That's why I still don't know how to explain what happened that afternoon. It was just a normal day. I got off work a little early, around 2 p.m., came home, kicked my shoes off by the door, and tossed my keys on the kitchen counter. Nobody else was home. My parents weren't due back from work until 4, and my sister was at school. I liked this part of the day. Coming home to an empty house, unwinding, just existing for a little while before the noise of family life kicked in. The first thing I did, like usual, was head to the bathroom. I won't sugarcoat it. I take my time when I'm in there. It's my personal ritual. Sit down, browse Reddit, scroll mindlessly until my legs start to go numb. And since I was alone, I left the door open. Because why the hell not? I had only been sitting there for a couple of minutes when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of the laundry room door opening. It's a heavy door, old wood, and it sticks to the frame. You have to yank it open, and when it closes, it doesn't just shut, it slams. That's exactly what I heard. A hard, echoing slam. I froze. My first thought was that someone had come home early. Maybe my sister had left school for some reason. Maybe my dad's job let him off early. "Hello?" I called out. No response. I frowned and reached out to push the bathroom door closed. If someone was home, they didn't need to walk in and see me mid-shit, but something about the silence on the other end of the house made me feel uneasy. Usually, if my dad came home, he'd be on the phone, listening to one of his audiobooks, shuffling around the kitchen. My sister would be loud as hell, dropping her bag, opening the fridge, complaining about her day. But there was nothing, just silence. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not rushed or casual, just steady. Someone walking from the laundry room into the living room. Then they stopped. I swallowed, my mouth suddenly dry. Dad? Silence. I wiped hurriedly, yanked my pants up, and stepped out of the bathroom, my heart pounding in my ears. The living room was empty. I walked in expecting to see someone, anyone, but it was just me. I called out again, louder this time. "Hello, who's here?" Nothing. The house felt wrong. You ever get that sensation, like the air is thicker, like something is just off? I felt it then, pressing down on my chest, making my skin crawl. I walked toward the laundry room, half expecting to see the door wide open. Maybe the wind had caught it somehow, but it was shut, closed tight, just like I had left it. I reached out, hesitant, and touched the doorknob. It was cold, too cold, like it had just come out of a freezer. My stomach twisted. I slowly turned it and pulled the door open. The laundry room was empty, nothing out of place. The washer and dryer were silent. The shelves were stocked with detergent, cleaning supplies, everything normal. But I knew what I had heard. I stepped back into the living room, my breath coming a little faster. I walked to the front door and swung it open, stepping outside. The driveway was empty except for my car. No other vehicles, no signs of anyone. Just the quiet hum of the neighborhood. That was when the fear hit me. I mean real fear. The kind that grips you, makes your body go cold, makes your instincts scream at you to run. I don't know why, but I bolted back inside and sat down on the couch. I just sat there, staring at the hallway, waiting for something to happen. I don't know what I expected. Another sound, another footstep, something. But nothing came. The house was silent again. Just me and my thoughts, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stayed like that for what felt like forever. Eventually, I got up and went back to my room, locked the door, and sat on my bed, trying to convince myself that maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I had been too deep in my phone, and my brain had played a trick on me. But I knew better. Because when my parents finally came home that evening, I asked them both, casually trying to keep my voice steady, if either of them had come home early that day. They both said no. I never heard that door open and close again. Story 8. I was 17 when this happened. My uncle used to throw me a few bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They had a nice 2-story house near the water, quiet neighborhood, not the kind of place you'd expect anything weird to happen. The kids were little. One was 3, the other 6. I watched them plenty of times and nothing ever felt off. Not until that night. It was late afternoon, maybe pushing early evening. My aunt was outside playing with the kids, and I was inside, just hanging out in the den. Nothing special, just scrolling through my phone, waiting to be needed. That's when I heard it, a baby crying. At first, I barely noticed it. I just assumed it was the 3-year-old, maybe waking up from a nap. The sound was faint but getting clearer, coming from upstairs. My aunt had to be up there with him, I figured, so I called out, "Hey, you got him?" No response. The crying kept going, steady, almost rhythmic. I called again, louder this time. "Hey, everything good?" Still nothing, just that crying. I got up and walked toward the stairs. The way their house was set up, the den was right near the bottom of the staircase, so I didn't have far to go. As I reached the first step, I hesitated. Something about the sound wasn't right. It was off, not like a normal baby cry. Too consistent, too deliberate, but I shook it off. Kids cry, right? I started walking up. Halfway up the stairs, I called for my aunt again. "Hello?" Nothing. The crying was definitely coming from one of the rooms at the end of the hallway. The 3-year-old's room, I thought. But something gnawed at me. I hadn't seen my aunt go upstairs. She had been outside. I was sure of it. A cold wave washed over me, and I stopped on the stairs. My heart was pounding now, my breathing a little shallow. Something was wrong. I turned my head slowly toward the back door, the one that led to the yard. The blinds were open, and through the glass I saw them, my aunt, my little cousins, outside, playing. My stomach dropped. The crying was still coming from upstairs. I froze. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. My brain was scrambling, trying to find a rational explanation. Maybe the window was open, and it was coming from a neighbor's house. But no, that wasn't it. It was coming from inside the house, from that room, right at the end of the hallway. And then it stopped. Dead silence. That was worse. I turned on my heel and walked down the stairs. Not fast, not running, just controlled, careful steps, like I didn't want to let whatever was up there know that I knew. The second my feet hit the bottom, I grabbed my keys off the counter. I didn't even put my shoes on. I didn't stop to think. I walked straight to the front door, opened it, stepped outside, and pulled it shut behind me. I could still hear the crying from inside the house. I got in my car, started the engine with shaking hands, and backed out of the driveway. I didn't stop until I was a few blocks away. Then I pulled over, trying to breathe, trying to make sense of it. There was no baby upstairs. My cousins were outside the whole time. My aunt was outside the whole time. I knew what I heard. I knew it wasn't them. And that silence, the way it just stopped when I realized, no, I didn't go back. I didn't text my aunt. I didn't call. I couldn't. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring at the road ahead of me, trying to push down the ice-cold fear creeping up my spine. I never babysat there again. Story 9. I was 9, maybe 10, when I got invited to a sleepover at my friend Joey's house. I remember not really wanting to go. His neighborhood was bad. Run-down houses, cars with missing tires just sitting in the yard, streetlights that barely worked. My mom wasn't thrilled about it either, but Joey and I had been friends for a while, and she didn't want to say no. She just told me to be careful and that she'd pick me up in the morning. When I got there, it was worse than I expected. Joey's house was small, the kind of place where you could hear everything happening in every room. His parents weren't really paying attention to us. His mom was watching TV in the living room, and his dad was out. The plan, Joey said, was for us to sleep outside in a tent. That didn't sit right with me, but all the other kids, 4 of us in total, thought it was the coolest thing ever. The tent was set up in the backyard, right against the chain-link fence that separated Joey's house from the alley. The alley was dark, the kind of dark that made it seem like something could be standing there just watching, and you wouldn't know. The tent itself was old, smelling like mildew and plastic, with a single flashlight in the middle. We played cards for a while, told jokes, and eventually, one by one, everyone fell asleep. I tried to stay awake, but the cold and the quiet got to me, and I must have dozed off. I woke up to silence, that kind of silence where it feels like even the air is holding its breath. My first thought was that I was freezing. My second thought was that I was alone. The tent was empty. Joey, the other kids, gone. The flashlight, still on, cast weird shadows against the nylon. My stomach dropped. I sat up and listened. Nothing. Not even the sound of cars from the main road. It was too quiet. I unzipped the tent and peeked outside. The yard was empty. No sign of Joey, no sign of anyone. The back porch light was still on, casting a dim glow over the patchy grass. But beyond that, just blackness. The alley was silent. The neighboring houses looked like abandoned shells, their windows dark. I whispered, "Joey?" Nothing. The cold made my teeth chatter. I stepped out of the tent, my bare feet sinking into the wet grass. My pajamas weren't enough against the chill, and I hugged myself as I scanned the yard. It didn't make sense. Where did everyone go? I walked toward the house. The back door was slightly open, moving just a little in the breeze. "Joey!" I called again, stepping inside. The house was dark, too dark. The TV, which had been on earlier, was off now. The air inside felt thick, stale. The hallway stretched ahead of me. disappearing into shadows. The kitchen was empty. The living room was empty. I checked Joey's room. The bed was unmade, his clothes and toys scattered around, but no Joey, no sign of his mom either. I stepped back, my breathing loud in my ears. "Hello!" I called out, louder this time. My voice felt small, swallowed by the house. No answer. My skin prickled with something I couldn't explain. I don't know why, but I walked to the front door. Maybe I thought they were playing a prank on me, hiding outside. But when I turned the knob, the door swung open without resistance. It wasn't locked. The street was empty. No people, no cars. The air felt thick, heavy. I could feel something watching me. I don't know how, but I could. The pressure of unseen eyes pressing against my skin. My breath caught in my throat. I turned back into the house. My heart was pounding. Something was wrong. Something was really, really wrong. Then I heard it. A sound from down the hall. A shuffle, like something dragging along the floor. Slow, deliberate. I froze. My whole body screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. Another sound, closer now. A creak, like someone shifting their weight. "Joey?" My voice barely came out. No answer. And then the worst sound of all. Breathing. Not mine. Slow, raspy breathing, just past the doorway, deep in the dark hall. I backed away, heart hammering. My legs felt numb. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out. The breathing got louder. A shadow moved in the darkness. Not a person, not Joey. Something else. Something too tall, too thin, its head tilting in that unnatural way like it was listening. I turned and ran. I don't remember how I found the phone. I don't remember dialing. But suddenly I was gripping the receiver with both hands, my fingers digging into the plastic as I whispered, "Mom, come get me. Now." She must have heard something in my voice because she didn't ask questions. Just said, "I'm coming." I hung up and backed into the corner of the kitchen, my eyes locked on the dark hallway. The breathing had stopped. The house was silent again, but I knew it was still there, waiting, watching. The minutes crawled by. I kept my eyes on the front door, waiting for my mom's headlights, for any sign of movement outside. Then finally I saw them. The beams of her car cut through the dark, washing over the front yard. The sight of it nearly made me collapse. I didn't hesitate. I ran for the door, flung it open, and sprinted to the car. The second I was inside, I slammed the door shut and locked it. My mom turned to look at me, her face creased with worry. "What happened?" she asked. I couldn't answer. I just shook my head. She put the car in reverse, and as we pulled away, I looked back at the house. The front door was still open. The inside was dark. And then, just for a second, I thought I saw something step back into the shadows. I never talked to Joey again. Never asked him what happened that night. I don't know if I even wanted to know. Story 10. I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where people didn't lock their doors until the late 90s. My house was old, probably built in the 1920s, one of those narrow two-story homes with a basement apartment that had its own entrance. My bedroom was just off the front entryway, so I could hear anytime someone came in or left. One evening, my friend Jake was over. We were just hanging out in my room playing video games when we heard the front door open. We both glanced up because it wasn't a quiet sound. The door had that old wood creak, and the latch always clicked loudly when it shut. Then we saw someone walk in. It was quick, just a dark figure moving past the doorway, heading toward the basement stairs. Neither of us got a good look at them, but we both saw them. Jake even went, "Oh, your tenant's home." That made sense. The basement apartment was rented out, though I didn't know my tenant's schedule that well. Still, something felt off. I didn't hear any footsteps on the basement stairs. Usually the steps creaked under even the lightest weight, but this time, nothing. Just the front door, the quick blur of movement, then silence. A few minutes passed. Jake and I were back in the game, but my mind kept circling back to what we'd seen. Something was bothering me. Finally, I paused the game and stood up. I just realized his car isn't in the driveway. Jake frowned. "Maybe someone dropped him off?" "Maybe," I said. but I wasn't convinced. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The driveway was empty. My tenant always parked right up against the house, and it wasn't like he went anywhere without his car. I turned back to Jake, my stomach tightening. There's no way that was him. Jake exhaled, setting the controller down. All right, let's check. We walked out of my room, through the entryway, into the basement door. I reached for the handle and hesitated. The air felt wrong. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and someone's just been fighting? That thick, tense pressure in the air? It was like that. My arms felt cold. I twisted the handle and pushed the door open. The basement stairs stretched down into darkness. The light switch was at the bottom. Jake whispered, "Dude." But I was already stepping forward. I wasn't thinking about ghosts or anything like that. I was thinking about an actual person, an intruder. Maybe some neighbor who thought they could hide out in my basement. The stairs creaked under my weight. Jake followed close behind. The only light came from the glow of my bedroom behind us, casting long shadows down the steps. The basement smelled like old wood and damp concrete. Halfway down, my foot hit something. I looked down. A single shoe lay on the step, tipped onto its side. My tenant's shoe. Jake muttered, "What the hell?" I stepped around it and reached the bottom. It was completely silent. The air was heavy, almost too thick to breathe. I reached for the light switch, flicked it up. Nothing. Jake swore. "Bulbs out?" I shook my head. That wasn't right. I had been down here earlier, checking the laundry. The light worked fine. Something moved in the dark. I heard it, just a small shift, like fabric brushing against something. It came from the far corner, where the tenant's small couch sat. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it. Someone or something was there. Then came the breathing. Long, slow, ragged inhales. Not normal breathing, but something deliberate, almost testing the air. It sent a bolt of ice through my chest. Jake grabbed my arm. "We need to go." I nodded, but I couldn't move. My feet were rooted in place. I was staring into that pitch-black corner, knowing something was there but unable to see it. And then, the breathing stopped. Silence. Thick, pressing silence. Then, a rush of movement. I didn't see it, but I felt it. A burst of air, a shift in the darkness. Something was coming straight at us. We bolted. I didn't think, I just ran. Jake was ahead of me, practically throwing himself up the stairs. I slammed the basement door shut behind us and locked it. For a long time, we just stood there panting. I pressed my ear against the door. Nothing. Just silence. Jake wiped his face. "What the hell was that?" I couldn't answer. I just shook my head. After a moment, we did something incredibly stupid. We checked every door and window in the house. Everything was locked. The front door, the back door, the windows, even the basement door leading outside. No one could have gotten in. No one could have left. The house was empty, but we had both seen someone walk in. Neither of us slept that night. I don't know what we saw. I don't know what was breathing in that basement. But I do know one thing. Something else was in my house that night. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.